It's now my pleasure to introduce our fourth panelist this evening, who is also my colleague, Reverend Dr. BruceYeates. Bruce is the Associate Dean of the Faculty of Arts, Law and Education and is the Social Work Program Coordinator in the School of Social Sciences. Dr. Yeates' learning and teaching interests revolve around social and community work methods, social policy practice, and social and community work professional practice. He has 40 years of professional social and community work practice and teaching in Ethiopia, Zambia, Canada, and the Pacific in the fields of community development, disability, youth work, gender equality, housing, hospital, interfaith chaplaincy, aging, and social policy. Bruce is an ordained minister in association, non-stipend, at the St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church of Suva and chaplain of the University of the South Pacific. He is also a member of the Fiji Alliance of Mental Health and a member of the Fiji Association of Social and Community Workers. Dr. Yeates will address the question, are families in Pacific societies prepared for tomorrow's development agenda, socially and economically? Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra, for the introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, fellow panelists. I do have a PowerPoint presentation, but we'll see if it could be put up, but we'll speak to it generally. So what I would like to talk about particularly is a view from social and community work education. And I wanted to begin with three small little quotes from different perspectives on the family here. The first one comes from the outgoing British High Commissioner to Samoa, who said, more work needs to be done to change attitudes towards domestic violence. She said she was shocked to hear statistics from the UN's research that 50% of teenage boys and 58% of adolescent girls in Samoa thought domestic violence was normal. The second one comes from Vanuatu, and it's personal feedback from a youth justice forum on the issue of domestic violence. And the participant said, I did not know I was breaking the law. The third one comes from the Constitution of the Republic of Fiji, Chapter 2, the Bill of Rights, Section 26. A person must not be unfairly discriminated against, directly or indirectly, on the grounds of his or her actual or supposed personal characteristics or circumstances, including race, culture, ethnic or social origin, color, place of origin, sex, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, birth, primary language, economic or social or health status, disability, age, religion, conscious, marital status, or pregnancy. That is quite a comprehensive list of characteristics that are found in families and represents, in one sense, a development agenda for the peoples of not only the Pacific, but particularly here in Fiji. On the other hand, we hear from the young people, as we heard from Pauline, that they are in a particular context and in a particular space in their understanding of what law is and what rights are. And so from a social work education point of view and educating social workers, we have to begin to work with people in the context in which they are living and trying to interpret development agendas as well then as beginning to live those. So we must deal with particular kinds of issues. And the first issue is the issue of power in the community. And I just wanted to point out my beginnings in sociology and my BA degree. One of the things that impacted me particularly was the book on the politics of the family by R.D. Laing. I had never thought about politics in a family. I thought about relationships, of caring relationships, etc. But I had never thought about power relationships within the family. And that started me on a new track of how to look and analyze a family, as well then as beginning to understand the role of family in society, in the wider society. So we can have politics within the family itself, and we can have politics between families. And you just have to look around the world in some of the troubled spots today where there's ruling families, and they are trying to be moved out of their office as ruling families. We also have to recognize that families are diverse, they are complex, and they are resilient. We have no one real definition of what a family is. And when I listen to my students telling about who they are, I'm constantly reminded of the diversity of the family situation. Many of whom now also are beginning to define family, as has been mentioned before, as a living group rather than as a blood relation family. And we also have to remember that families adapt and they change. And they change and they adapt because of very radical and traumatic circumstances at some times, but also those that are more gradual in nature. So these are issues of power that we have to look at when we're dealing with the family. The next point that I'd like to raise is the contextualization of the family itself. And here we have to begin to look at we have to look at individuals, we have to look at families and living groups, as I've mentioned, as well as communities. Contextualization is an important aspect of understanding and working with families. And contextualization is at the local level. It's where people are at that particular point in time, in the political jurisdiction, the social, the cultural jurisdiction in which they are a part. We have to remind ourselves as social work educators and social workers, and community workers, that we have to understand the context in which we are working. Today's Fiji Times, there's an article about people with mental health illness, and the director of health is saying how the families these people are let down by immediate family. They're living on the streets. They are finding a new group to call their living group, to call their family on the streets of Suva. And we must also look at the context of the social and ecological justice, which has been talked about by other panelists. We have to look at social justice from the human rights perspective, as is outlined in the Charter, the Bill of Rights in the Fiji Constitution. But we also need to look at ecological justice and the environment in which we live. In the early 2000s, social workers just concentrated on social justice. And along with other organizations, we've begun to realize that the environment and climate change is not just for science, it is also a social science concern and a human rights issue. So we must look at the context, the human rights context, the ecological context in which families are operating and living. I'd also like to point out the different kinds of worldviews. These are normative positions that impact the family. The first one is corporate globalization, which treats the family as consumers. I was reminded in Vanuatu on Sunday when I was there for celebrating Mother's Day, that in Fiji, I believe it's the Methodist Church, will celebrate Mother's Day this coming Sunday, because the previous Sunday, that is, which we've just had, is actually considered the business house's Mother's Day. and they want to separate the material from the more spiritual or faith-based aspects of mothers in the family, roles in the family. So corporate globalization is a big issue impacting families and making us consumers and wanting to buy things. And if you notice in the stores where all the chocolates and the chewing gum is when you take your children through the shopping aisles, and just as you're there to pay the final bill, the child starts screaming and yelling for the candy or for the chocolate or for whatever, and parents begin to pay out the money for that just to keep the child quiet. So we have to be very cautious about the consumerism that is impacting us. The second worldview is human sustainable development, which is more the United Nations perspective. And here families are partnering with, the United Nations systems are partnering with governments, as service and families are in one sense looked at as service recipients, but also as partners in the development process that might occur. And the third worldview is one of social transformation and in indigenous movements. And here we are seeing that families and living groups, individuals and communities are having ownership of their own and control of their own development. And this ideally is the place that we would like to be in terms of social and community work education as we work with families. So we have these three very basic worldviews, normative worldviews that are in our globalized world today. And each of these worldviews are happening simultaneously. They are oftentimes in conflict with each other. And this causes difficulties for families in understanding the complexity of the world we live in today. And finally then, I'd like to just mention about the approaches to working with families. The first one is the top-down and community-oriented approach that we, as educators and working with our students and ourselves in practice, are a part of this kind of activity. Oftentimes these are development agendas that are set outside the community, outside the family. They are the government policies, they are the United Nations policies, and these are top-down and are basically controlled by the organizations which have the policies in place. And their workers then are community-oriented, they take the policy out, they implement it in the community, and people are invited to be a part of that policy or the implementation, the project, etc. So this has an impact on families in various ways. And the other approach to working with families is a bottom-up and community strength-based development approach, in which the community, the family itself, has the ownership of the development project. And they are able to negotiate positions with government, with private sector organizations, NGO organizations, civil society organizations. They're able to negotiate a position and work within the communities or within their families themselves. So I'm not able to answer the question, are families in the Pacific societies prepared for tomorrow's development agenda socially and economically? But all we can do is begin to analyze that situation and figure out ways that we can work with, not work for families, but work with families as they proceed over the next generations in the development agenda that will be set for them. Thank you.